My name is Diana. I'm 41 years old, and I want to tell you about the afternoon my mother-in-law stood up at my father-in-law's funeral reception, tapped her glass with a spoon, and announced to 63 people that her son's marriage had been a mistake from the beginning, that I had never been good enough for their family, and that now that her husband was gone she was finally free to say what everyone in that room had always known. And I want to tell you that I let her finish every single word, because I had been waiting for exactly this moment for 11 years, and I had something in my bag that was about to make every person in that room understand that the woman standing at the head of the table had no idea what she was talking about, and more importantly, no idea what she had already lost. I let her finish, and then I stood up, and I opened my bag, and what I put on that table changed everything that happened after, for her, for my husband, for the family that had spent 11 years making me feel like I did not belong in it. And I want to tell you exactly what it was and exactly what it did, because justice, when it finally arrives, should be witnessed. If you have ever been made to feel like an outsider in a family that was supposed to be yours, stay with me, subscribe to Unspoken Truth. And if you have ever been humiliated in front of people while holding the one thing that could destroy the person humiliating you, hit that subscribe button. Because what happened in that room is something I have needed to tell for a very long time. I had been married to Gregory Harmon for 11 years. We had met in Boston when I was 28. He was in commercial law. I was in urban planning. We had dated for 2 years and gotten married in a small ceremony that his mother Eleanor had attended with the specific energy of a woman performing attendance rather than experiencing it. She had worn black to our wedding, which she later told someone was because she was in mourning for the life her son was giving up. That someone told someone else who told me, which is how information travels in families that do not say things directly but make sure they are said. Eleanor Harmon was 68 years old and had been the primary force in her family for as long as anyone could remember. Her husband Walter had been a gentle and largely absent presence, a man who loved his wife with the specific uncritical devotion of someone who had decided early that the path of least resistance was also the path of most peace. He had been kind to me from the beginning in the quiet way of a man who cannot change the atmosphere but can occasionally open a window, and I had loved him for it with the specific gratitude of someone who has very few allies in a room and notices each one precisely. Eleanor's campaign against me had begun before the wedding and had never stopped. It was not dramatic. It operated the way effective campaigns operate, through accumulation, through the consistent drip of small exclusions and pointed comments and the particular social architecture of a woman who understood how to make someone feel unwelcome without ever providing a single quotable instance. She told Gregory the first was cold. She told his sister I was ambitious in a way that meant I had no interest in family. She told his aunt that she worried Gregory had married someone who saw him as a stepping stone, and Gregory, who had a specific and consistent relationship with conflict avoidance, heard these things and filed them in the category of mom being mom and moved on, which was his answer to everything his mother did and which I had spent 11 years filing in my own category, the category of things I was watching and noting and not yet ready to use. I had a folder. I want to tell you about the folder because it matters. A physical folder in a fireproof lockbox in my home office. I had been maintaining it for 9 years, since the second year of the marriage when I had understood clearly that Eleanor was not going to stop and that the day was going to come when documentation would matter. Every incident recorded with date and context. The comment at Christmas dinner in year 3 about how Gregory's previous girlfriend had been so natural with children. The family photograph taken at Thanksgiving in year 5 that Eleanor had framed and put on her mantle, and that did not include me because I had been in the kitchen when it was taken and no one had come to get me. The conversation I had overheard at Gregory's sister's birthday party in year 7 where Eleanor had told 2 of her friends that she had never understood what Gregory saw in me and that she expected it wouldn't last. I had written it down that evening with the date and the names of the people present, and I had put it in the folder. 9 years of a folder, waiting for the right moment. Walter Harmon died in September of a heart attack that was sudden and complete. He was 71 years old and he had been in good health, and the suddenness of it had the specific quality of a grief that has not had time to prepare itself. Gregory flew to Connecticut immediately and I followed the next day. And the days in the Harmon house that followed were the days of a family closing around its loss in the specific way that families do, which in the Harmon family meant Eleanor at their center of everything and everyone else organized around her grief. which was real and which I do not diminish, and which also, within 48 hours, had begun to incorporate me as a subordinate problem to be managed rather than a daughter-in-law to be included. I was assigned to manage the catering for the reception. Not asked, assigned. Eleanor told Gregory, who told me with the specific apologetic shrug of a man who has spent his entire life managing the space between his mother and everyone else and has developed a shrug that functions as both acknowledgement and abdication. I managed the catering because Walter had been kind to me and his reception deserved to be done well, and because I was not going to let Eleanor's management of me become a reason for Walter's farewell to be anything less than it should be. The reception was on a Thursday afternoon. 63 people in the Harmon house, the house where Gregory had grown up and where Eleanor had reigned for 40 years. I had arranged the food and the flowers and the tables with the precise attention I brought to things I wanted done correctly, and I was standing near the window talking to Walter's brother when Eleanor tapped her glass. She had been drinking since noon. I want to be clear about that, not to diminish her grief, but because it is relevant to what happened next. She had been drinking and she had been receiving condolences for 3 hours and something in the receiving of condolences. The accumulation of people telling her how wonderful Walter had been and how much he had loved her, had produced in her a specific and volatile emotional state that was looking for somewhere to go, and the somewhere it went was me. She stood at the head of the table and tapped her glass, and the room went quiet with the specific obedient quiet of people who have spent 40 years obeying Eleanor Harmon's calls to attention, and she began to speak. And what she said I am going to tell you because I think it matters to understand the full weight of what she chose to do in a room full of people at her husband's funeral reception. She said that Walter had spent 11 years asking her to give me a chance, and that she had tried and that she had failed because some things cannot be forced. She said that Gregory had made a choice 11 years ago that she had never agreed with and that she had watched that choice diminish her son year by year. She said that I had come into their family with my own agenda and my own ambitions and that I had never once put Gregory or the family first. She said that now that Walter was gone, she was done pretending. She said that Gregory deserved better and that she hoped, now that the truth was finally in the room, that he would find the courage to do what needed to be done. 63 people heard every word. Gregory was standing 6 feet from me with the expression of a man who has just watched a controlled demolition he did not authorize. His sister Claire had her hand over her mouth. Walter's brother was looking at the floor, and Eleanor was standing at the head of the table with the specific released energy of someone who has been holding something for a very long time and has just let it go. I waited until she sat down. I counted to 5, and then I stood up. I want to tell you about what was in my bag because the what is the entire story. 3 weeks before Walter died, on a Sunday afternoon in August, Walter had called me, not Gregory, me. He had asked if I could come to Connecticut alone. He had something he wanted to give me. I had driven up on a Saturday and sat with him in his study while Eleanor was at her book club, and he had put a manila envelope on the desk between us and said, "Diana, I want you to have this before anything happens." And the something that could happen had happened 3 weeks later, and I had the envelope, and I had not told Gregory it existed because Walter had asked me not to. Not yet, he had said. You will know when. I knew when. The envelope contained 3 things. The first was a letter in Walter's handwriting, 12 pages, dated August of that year, addressed to the Harmon family. The second was a copy of a codicil to Walter's will that his attorney had filed 6 weeks before his death. And the third was a document I had not expected, a printed email exchange between Eleanor and Gregory's sister Claire from 4 years earlier. Walter had found it on the family computer, had printed it and kept it, and the exchange was a coordination, specific and detailed, of how to handle what Claire called the Diana situation, how to manage Gregory's perception of me, what stories to tell, what incidents to emphasize. A campaign documented in their own words in a 4-year-old email chain that Walter had been carrying in silence ever since. I reached into my bag and I put the manila envelope on the table. I said, "Walter gave me this 3 weeks ago and asked me to open it when the moment was right. Eleanor, I think this is the moment," and I slid it down the table toward Gregory. Gregory looked at the envelope, he looked at me, he picked it up and opened it. He pulled out the codicil first because it was on top. He read the first page and his face changed, not dramatically but completely. The specific complete change of someone reading something that reorganizes everything they thought they understood. He passed it to Claire, who was sitting beside him. Claire read it and put her face down on the table and would not look at her mother. The codicil was specific and irrevocable. Walter had amended his will 6 weeks before his death to remove Eleanor as the sole trustee of the family estate and to appoint an independent attorney in her place. He had also designated a specific bequest, the family lake house in Vermont, the property that had been in the Harmon family for 3 generations and that Eleanor had always treated as her personal domain, to me, Diana Harmon, in recognition of 11 years of dignity in the face of treatment that Walter described in the codicil language as unworthy of his family's name. 63 people were in that room. Several of them could read the document from where they were sitting, and the ones who couldn't were watching Eleanor's face, which had gone the specific white of someone who has just understood that the ground they were standing on was not the ground they thought it was. Gregory picked up the letter next, Walter's handwriting, 12 pages. He read 2 paragraphs and stopped and looked at his mother, not with anger, with something that was worse than anger, with the specific devastated clarity of a man who was reading his father's account of something he witnessed and did not stop. Gregory had not known the full extent of it, I want to be clear about that. He had known his mother was difficult and had filed it under mom being mom for 11 years, but Walter's letter laid out what Eleanor had done with the specificity of someone who had been watching for 11 years and had written it down, every incident, every comment, every coordinated exclusion, some of which Gregory had been present for and had minimized and some of which had happened without his knowledge. 12 pages of his father's handwriting describing what his wife had endured in his family's house. Gregory put the letter down and picked up the email chain. He read the first page. He read the second page. He looked at Claire. Claire looked at the table. He said, "Claire," in a voice I had never heard from him before, a voice with no management in it. And Claire said, "Gregory, I can explain." And Gregory said, "At Walter's funeral reception, Claire," and Claire did not say anything else. Eleanor had not moved since I put the envelope on the table. She was sitting at the head of the table where she had stood for minutes earlier to tell 63 people that I was wrong for her son. And she was sitting with the stillness of someone who has just seen the architecture of something they built come apart. She said, "Walter wouldn't," and I said, "Walter did. 3 weeks before he died he sat in his study and he told me he was sorry it had taken him so long." Those were his exact words. He was sorry it had taken him so long. The room was absolutely silent. The specific silence of 63 people who have just witnessed something they did not expect and are still processing what it means. Gregory's aunt, Walter's sister Margaret, who was 74 years old and had been sitting at the far end of the table, stood up. She said, "I need to say something," she said. "I watched what Eleanor did to this girl for 11 years and I said nothing because Walter asked me to let him handle it and I respected that." She said, "Walter handled it." And she picked up her glass and looked at me and said, "Welcome to the family, Diana. You were always in it as far as I was concerned." And she drank. 3 other people at the table raised their glasses, quietly, without announcement, the specific quiet solidarity of people who have been waiting for permission to show a side they had been keeping to themselves. Eleanor stood up from the table and left the room. She walked through her own house and up the stairs and the door of her bedroom closed and did not open again for the rest of the reception. And the reception, without Eleanor at the head of the table, became something it had never been in 11 years of Harmon family gatherings. It became warm. People came to talk to me who had never talked to me before. Walter's friends and his colleagues and his family members who had been watching from a distance and who now had something to organize themselves around. Gregory sat beside me and held my hand and did not say anything for a long time and then said, "I am so sorry." And I said, "I know." And I let that be enough for that afternoon because there was more to say and the afternoon was not the place for all of it. The weeks after the reception were the weeks of reckoning. Gregory and I had the real conversations we had never had, not in one sitting and not cleanly but with the accumulated honesty of 2 people who have been given, by a dead man's 12 pages, the specific permission to stop managing and start seeing. Gregory read his father's letter 4 times. He told me that, 4 times across 3 weeks. He said each time he read it he understood something he had not understood the time before, and I believed him because the Gregory who read it 4 times was different from the Gregory who had spent 11 years filing things under mom being mom. Claire called me 6 weeks after the reception. She did not apologize in the way that apologies are supposed to work. she said. I was wrong. I did things that were wrong. I don't know if that's enough. And I said, it's a start, and I meant it. Because I had spent 11 years in a family that communicated in performances rather than truths, and Claire saying I was wrong without dressing it in justifications was more than I had ever received from that family before. Eleanor did not call. Eleanor did not write. Eleanor had her attorney contact Walter's attorney about the codicil, and the attorney's response, which Gregory showed me, was 4 sentences long and concluded with the phrase, "The document is irrevocable and fully executed." The lake house transferred to my name in November, on a grey Thursday when the trees had lost most of their leaves. Gregory drove me up and we stood on the porch looking at the water, and he said, "Dad knew what he was doing," and I said, "He always did. He just took his time getting there." And Gregory laughed, not a big laugh, a small one, the specific small laugh of someone who is grieving and grateful at the same time and has found, in the middle of both, something that is true. The lake house is mine. The codicil is recorded. Eleanor knows it and has not found a way around it because there is no way around it. Walter made sure of that 6 weeks before he died with the careful attention of a civil engineer who understood load-bearing structures. He built something that held weight, and I have been holding it ever since. I think about Walter in his study on that Saturday in August, the manila envelope on the desk between us, and I think about what it cost him to put that envelope together, to sit with the knowledge of what his wife had done for 11 years and to finally do something about it, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the specific quiet precision of a man who understood that some things need to be built before they can be deployed. And I think about the moment he said he was sorry it had taken him so long, and I think that the sorrow was real and that the sorry was not enough to balance 11 years and that it was also, genuinely, something, and I have decided to hold it as something. I was not a problem to be managed. I was not an agenda. I was not an outsider who failed to belong. I was a woman who spent 11 years in a family that had decided what I was before they knew me, and who had the specific patience and the specific dignity to wait until the truth had somewhere to land. And when it landed completely, in a room of 63 people, with Walter's handwriting on 12 pages and a codicil that could not be undone and an aunt who stood up and said welcome to the family. And that landing was everything. My name is Diana. I'm 41 years old. And I kept a folder for 9 years and waited for the right moment, and the right moment came at the worst possible occasion in the best possible way. And the woman who stood up to humiliate me in front of 63 people sat down for minutes later, having lost her lake house, her audience, and the narrative she had been managing for 11 years. All of it, in 4 minutes, in front of everyone. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to fight. I put an envelope on a table and let a dead man's words do what 11 years of silence had been building toward. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself. And remember, keep the folder, wait for the moment, and let the truth do what anger never could.